Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. I knew something was off the moment I stepped outside and saw the bright yellow lines painted across my driveway. At first, I thought some road maintenance crew had made a mistake, but when I followed the lines to the freshly planted sign at the edge of my property, my stomach twisted. Community parking HOA approved. My first reaction was to laugh. This had to be a joke, a prank. Some idiot must have thought it would be funny to paint lines on my private property. But the longer I stayed, the clearer it became this was no joke. The paint was official. The sign looked professionally done, and a small note was taped beneath it with the HOA's official letterhead. I ripped the note off and read it. As per recent amendments to the community guidelines, your driveway has been designated as shared public parking for the neighborhood. This decision was made to accommodate rising parking demands. Compliance is mandatory. Unauthorized obstruction of community property will result in fines. My blood boiled. What kind of twisted nonsense was this? Who in their right mind thought they could just take my driveway and turn it into public parking? I paid for this house. I paid for this land. My name was on the deed, and yet according to this pathetic excuse for a letter, I no longer had a say in whether random people could park in my own driveway. I stormed back inside, grabbed my phone, and dialed the HOA's number. The robotic voice of the automated answering system nearly made me snap the device in half. Thank you for calling the Mile Homeowners Association. Your call is important to us. Please listen carefully as our menu options have changed. I jabbed at the keypad, forcing my way through the useless prompts until I finally reached a live person. HOA office, this is Melanie speaking. How may I assist you? I clenched my teeth. Yeah, you can start by explaining why my driveway has suddenly become public parking without my permission. There was a brief silence, then a click, and suddenly a different voice came through the line. It was smug, dripping with the kind of condescension that made my fists tighten. Ah, Mr. Harrison, the woman on the other end said. I was wondering when you'd call. This is Karen Mallister, president of the HOA. I assume you've seen the updates to your property? My grip on the phone tightened. Updates? You mean the ones where you steal my driveway and pretend it's legal? I could hear the smirk in her voice when she responded. It's not stealing, Mr. Harrison. It's a community decision. The board voted unanimously in favor of the change. The neighborhood needed additional parking spaces, and since your driveway is in a convenient location, it was chosen. I let out a bit of a laugh. You mean you all got together behind closed doors and decided that my property was now public? That's not how this works. My driveway is private property. Karen sighed dramatically. The Homeowners Association has the right to allocate community resources as necessary. This is in line with our community guidelines. In my commitment to maintaining a balanced and accommodating neighborhood, I nearly crushed my phone in my hand. My driveway is not a community resource. It's my damn property. Karen chuckled. Not anymore, Mr. Harrison. I suggest you adjust accordingly. Any attempt to tow vehicles from a designated community parking zone will result in a violation. And remember, fines will accrue daily if you refuse to comply. I was too angry to form words. Before I could even begin to respond, she continued in an even sweeter tone. Oh, and before you ask, yes, the decision is final. There is no appeal process. Have a great day. Then came a sharp beep of the call, disconnecting. For a long moment, I just stood there gripping my phone, my mind racing through the sheer audacity of what just happened. I wasn't going to let this slide. No way in hell. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. Not even an hour later, the first car rolled in like they owned the place. A white sedan pulled into my driveway, the driver casually stepping out like it was a designated parking lot. He was some random guy from 2 streets over, carrying grocery bags as he strolled past me with a nod. Hey man, thanks for letting us use the spot. The HOA made a great call on this. I stared at him, my fists clenched, my pulse pounding. This wasn't happening. I wasn't about to let my home become a free-for-all parking lot. Without thinking, I went straight inside, pulled up my local towing company's number, and made the call. Yeah, I need a vehicle removed from my private property, I said. The dispatcher asked for my address, then hesitated. Wait, you said private property? You're sure it's not a designated public zone? I felt my jaw tighten. It's my driveway. That's as private as it gets. There was another pause. Sir, we've actually been instructed by the HOA not to remove cars from that address. They've designated it as community parking. My entire body stiffened. They did what? The dispatcher sighed. Yeah, they sent out a notice last week. We legally can't tow vehicles from HOA-approved zones. I slammed the phone down. They had covered every angle. They had made sure I had no options, no way out, no legal recourse. At least that's what they thought. The next few hours were hell. More cars showed up, each driver giving me the same annoying, oblivious smile. One woman even had the audacity to say, "It's so nice of you to share, dear," as she waddled off to her house. My own driveway, my property, had become a glorified parking lot for entitled neighbors, and I was expected to just sit back and let it happen. But as I stood there watching my driveway fill up with strangers' vehicles, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was focused, calculated. If they wanted to play dirty, I could play dirtier. If they wanted to turn my driveway into public property, I was going to make sure it was the most inconvenient, unbearable, and downright unusable parking space in the entire neighborhood. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I planned. I researched. I made calls. I sketched ideas, and by the time the sun rose, I knew exactly how I was going to take my driveway back. They wanted public parking? Fine. They were about to get the worst parking experience of their lives, and it all started with a truckload of sand. The next morning, I stepped outside to find my driveway looking even worse than before. Not only were more cars parked there, but the HOA had taken things a step further. They had installed an official-looking sign at the entrance that read, "Community parking violators will be fined." The audacity of it nearly made me lose it right there. My own property labeled, as if I had no ownership over it. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. But as I scanned the scene, I realized something even more infuriating. One of the cars parked in my driveway had blocked my garage. I couldn't even get my own truck out. My pulse pounded in my temples as I marched over to the offending car, ready to confront whoever owned it. But there was no one in sight, just a row of vehicles belonging to people who had apparently decided that my private space was now a public amenity. I called the HOA office again, barely containing my rage. After the usual robotic prompts, I finally got through. "HOA, this is Melanie speaking. How may I help you?" I gritted my teeth, trying to keep my voice level. "Yeah, Melanie, this is Mr. Harrison. I need to speak with Karen Mallister right now." There was a long pause before she responded in an annoyingly chipper tone. "I'm sorry, but Mrs. Mallister is in a meeting at the moment. Would you like to leave a message?" I let out a humorous laugh. "Oh, I got a message, all right. Tell her that if my driveway isn't cleared in the next hour, I'll be pressing charges for trespassing." Melanie hesitated, clearly caught off guard by my tone. "Sir, as per the recent amendments to the community guidelines, your driveway is now considered community property for parking purposes. There's nothing Mrs. Mallister can do at this time." I clenched my fist so tightly my knuckles cracked. "Nothing she can do? Are you people even hearing yourselves? This is my property, not yours." Melanie's voice remained sickeningly sweet. "I understand your frustration, sir, but the board has already made a decision. You should have attended the meeting if you had concerns." I hung up before I could say something that would make things worse. There was no reasoning with them. They had already decided that my property was theirs to control, and they weren't going to back down just because I was mad about it. It wasn't long before I started hearing whispers from my neighbors. Some were on my side, shaking their heads at how ridiculous the situation had become. Others, however, were fully supporting the HOA's decision. One man even had the nerve to tell me that I was being selfish for wanting to keep my driveway to myself when the neighborhood desperately needed more parking. Later that day, I received an official notice in the mail, stamped with the HOA seal. I already knew it wasn't going to be good news. I tore it open and skimmed the contents, my frustration growing with each word. The letter informed me that I had been issued a violation for obstruction of community resources. My crime? Calling a towing company without HOA approval. The fine, $500. $500 for trying to remove an illegally parked car from my own driveway. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head in disbelief. They were really pushing me, testing to see how far they could go before I broke. But they underestimated me. I wasn't some pushover who would just roll over and accept this. I spent the rest of the afternoon looking into property laws, digging through everything I could find about homeowners associations and what legal grounds they had. What I discovered only made me angrier. Technically, the HOA had overstepped its authority. My property deed clearly stated that my driveway was private property, and while the HOA could enforce community rules, they couldn't outright take away a homeowner's rights to their own land. That gave me an idea. If they were going to play dirty, I was going to play smarter. I called up my neighbor, an older gentleman named Tom, who had lived in the community longer than anyone else. He had his fair share of run-ins with the HOA over the years, and if there was anyone who hated them as much as I did, it was him. When he answered, I got straight to the point. Tom, I need some advice. The HOA is trying to take over my driveway, and I need to know my options. There was a chuckle on the other end of the line. They finally got to you, huh? I was wondering when you'd end up on their list. What do they do this time? I explained everything. The sudden decision, the fines, the parking, the sign labeling my driveway as community property. By the time I finished, Tom was silent for a long moment before he let out a low whistle. Damn, they're getting bolder. Yeah, I muttered. So what do I do? Legally speaking, they can't actually take your property, but they can sure as hell make your life miserable if you don't go along with it. They've done this kind of thing before, picking on one homeowner until they give up. I leaned against the counter, rubbing my temple. Well, I'm not giving up. Tom chuckled again. Good, because if you want to beat them, you need to be smarter than they are. The HOA has power, but they also have limits, and I know just the way to push them right up to those limits. I listened carefully as Tom laid out his plan. It was bold, risky, and just crazy enough to work. If the HOA wanted to treat my driveway as public space, then I was going to make it the most inconvenient public space they'd ever seen. That night, as I sat in my living room staring out the window at the cars still clogging up my driveway, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about my driveway anymore. This was about standing up against the HOA's overreach. They thought they could control everything. They thought they could bully me into submission. They were about to find out they were wrong. Find out just how wrong they were. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of determination. If the HOA wanted to treat my driveway as their personal parking lot, I was going to make sure they regretted it. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to make them wish they had never even thought about pulling this stunt. I had spent half the night researching, planning, and making calls. Now it was time to put everything into action. I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and headed out. As I stepped onto my porch, I took a deep breath and looked at the mess in front of me. My driveway was still filled with cars, some of them parked so callously that they were almost blocking the sidewalk. A few people were milling around, chatting like this was some kind of public parking lot at a shopping mall. One guy even had the nerve to lean against his car, sipping coffee, completely unfazed by the fact that he was standing on my property. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. Not for long. I got into my truck, backed out carefully since someone had once again parked too close to my garage, and drove straight to a landscaping supply company on the other side of town. When I walked in, I headed straight to the counter where a bored-looking clerk barely glanced up from his phone. "Help you with something?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I need a bulk order of sand." A lot of sand. That got his attention. He raised an eyebrow, finally putting his phone down. "How much are we talking?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the rough measurements I had sketched out, enough to cover my entire driveway. He let out a low whistle. "That's a hell of a lot of sand. You sure about this?" I grinned. "Oh, I'm sure." After working out the details, I arranged for a delivery later that afternoon. As I walked back to my truck, I felt something I hadn't felt since this whole mess started. Excitement. The HOA thought they had me backed into a corner. They thought I was just another homeowner who would roll over and take whatever nonsense they threw at me. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. When I got back home, I parked my truck in the street since my driveway was still occupied. I didn't even bother arguing with the people who had parked there. I just smiled to myself and went inside, watching the clock as I waited. A few hours later, the sound of heavy machinery echoed down the street. I stepped outside just as the landscaping truck pulled up, a massive dump bed filled with fresh sand. The driver hopped out, adjusting his cap as he looked over the area. "You sure you want this dump right here?" he asked. I nodded. "Right here." He shrugged. "All right, your call." Moments later, the back of the truck tilted and a massive cascade of golden sand poured out, covering the entire driveway. Car alarms went off as the sand buried the tires of the parked cars, sending clouds of dust into the air. By the time the truck was empty, my driveway had been transformed into something straight out of a beach resort. I planted a wooden sign in the middle of the sand. "Private sandbox, no vehicles allowed." I barely had time to admire my work before the first wave of outrage hit. A woman stormed out of her car, staring in disbelief at the sand that now surrounded her tires. "What the hell is this?" she screeched. I crossed my arms. "Oh, just a little landscaping project. Nothing in the HOA rules against sand pits, is there?" Her face turned red as she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the HOA." I grinned. "Go ahead." It didn't take long. Within 20 minutes, Karen Mallister herself showed up, looking like she had just swallowed a lemon. She stomped up my walkway, her high heels sinking slightly into the loose sand. "Mr. Harrison, what is the meaning of this?" I smiled, keeping my voice pleasant. "It's a sand pit. It's a beautiful addition to the community, don't you think?" She stared at me like I had lost my mind. "You need to remove this immediately." I shrugged. "Why? It's my property, isn't it?" Her nostrils flared. "Your driveway is designated as community parking. This is a direct violation." I pulled out my phone and showed her the HOA rulebook. Actually, there's no rule against landscaping modifications, and technically my driveway is still accessible. It's just sandy. Her face darkened as she realized she had no immediate way to argue against me. She pulled out her phone and started making calls, probably trying to figure out a way to shut this down. Meanwhile, more neighbors started gathering, some laughing, others whispering to each other. A man in a suit, probably a board member, arrived shortly after. He spoke to Karen in hushed tones before turning to me. "Mr. Harrison, the HOA will be issuing you a formal violation for obstructing community property." I smiled. "On what grounds?" He hesitated. "You can't just dump sand in a community parking zone." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean my driveway, the one I own?" Karen clenched her fists. "This is not over, Mr. Harrison." I smirked. "Oh, I know." She turned on her heel and stomped away, barking orders into her phone. The board member followed, shooting me a glare as he left. I leaned against my porch railing, watching them go. The HOA thought they could push me around, but they had just learned something important. I wasn't going down without a fight. Over the next few days, the sand pit became a neighborhood spectacle. Kids started playing in it, neighbors took pictures, and some even brought beach chairs just to spite the HOA. The whole thing became a joke at their expense, and the more they fumed, the funnier it got. Of course, I knew the HOA wouldn't just let this go, and sure enough, a few days later, they tried to escalate things. But I was ready. I had done my research. I knew my rights. They wanted a war. They were about to get one. The HOA didn't waste any time trying to fight back. Less than 24 hours after my driveway had been transformed into a giant sand pit, I received another official letter from them. This one was even more aggressive than the last. It informed me that I had been issued multiple violations. Violations including obstruction of community property, failure to comply with neighborhood aesthetics, and the vague and utterly ridiculous charge of creating an unauthorized hazard. The letter also stated that if I didn't remove the sand within 72 hours, I would be fined $500 per day until it was cleared. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee and laughing to myself as I read the threats. They were desperate. They thought they could scare me into backing down, but I had expected this, and I had no intention of moving an inch. By midday, the HOA board members showed up again, this time with Karen leading the charge. She arrived in full force, clipboard in hand, a pair of sunglasses perched on her face like she was some kind of military general arriving on a battlefield. Behind her stood 3 other board members, all wearing the same smug expressions as if they were already celebrating their victory. I stepped outside, leaning against my porch railing, arms crossed, waiting for the show to begin. Karen wasted no time. "Mr. Harrison, I'm giving you one final opportunity to comply voluntarily before we escalate this situation further, she said, her tone dripping with false patience. The sand needs to be removed immediately. I took a slow sip of my coffee before responding, "Oh, I'd love to help, Karen, but the thing is, I kind of like the new look. It really adds some character, don't you think?" Her jaw tightened. This is not a joke. The HOA has the authority to enforce community standards, and this, she waved her hand toward the sand, is a blatant violation. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the section of the HOA rulebook that I had highlighted. Actually, Karen, nowhere in your rulebook does it say anything about homeowners being prohibited from landscaping their own driveways. And as you can see, I've just made a simple modification to my landscape. One of the board members, a short, balding man who looked like he hadn't smiled in decades, cleared his throat. "This is not in the spirit of the community guidelines." I grinned. "That's interesting because when you guys took my driveway and declared it public parking, I don't remember anyone worrying about the spirit of the community then." Karen's face turned red. "You are creating an obstruction." I glanced at the sand and shrugged. "It's still a driveway. It's just a little harder to park on now. If people are struggling, maybe they should park somewhere else, like their own driveways." Karen took a deep breath, clearly trying to keep herself from screaming. "We'll see how funny you think this is when we take legal action." I smirked. "Go ahead, but I hope you've got deep pockets because I've spoken to a lawyer, and if you try to fine me for something that isn't against your rules, I'm going to countersue for harassment and illegal property seizure." The board members exchanged nervous glances. Karen, however, wasn't ready to admit defeat just yet. She let out a frustrated huff and turned on her heel. "This isn't over, Mr. Harrison." I watched as they marched away, muttering among themselves. I had won this round, but I knew they weren't done. The HOA was like a parasite. It didn't just give up, it dug in, waiting for another way to strike. The real battle began the next day. Flyers started appearing in mailboxes all over the neighborhood, warning residents about my so-called reckless disregard for community order. The flyer made me out to be some kind of neighborhood menace, accusing me of deliberately sabotaging HOA policies and undermining the values of the community. It even included a picture of my property, as if that was supposed to make people clutch their pearls in horror. The flyer was obviously meant to turn the neighborhood against me, but it had the exact opposite effect. My phone started buzzing with messages from neighbors who found the whole thing hilarious. Some even showed up at my house just to congratulate me on standing up to the HOA. One of my neighbors, an older guy named Jeff, knocked on my door with a grin on his face. "Man, I gotta say, you've got guts. No one's ever gone this far to push back against those clowns." I laughed. "Yeah, well, I figured someone had to do it." Jeff shook his head. "You know what? I think you just started something. People are getting real tired of the HOA's nonsense. This might be exactly what we needed." I didn't realize how right he was until that weekend. Something strange started happening in the neighborhood. It started with my immediate next-door neighbor, who dug up part of his front yard and replaced it with a rock garden. Then another neighbor painted their mailbox bright orange just to see if the HOA would lose their minds over it. By the end of the weekend, small acts of defiance were popping up everywhere. Someone planted a row of flamingos in their front yard. Another homeowner put up a wooden sign that said, "This property is not a HOA puppet." The HOA was losing control, and they knew it. Karen and her board scrambled to regain their grip, issuing violation notices left and right. But the thing was, they had pushed too far for too long, and now people were fed up. Instead of backing down, more and more homeowners were openly defying them. It was beautiful. As expected, Karen showed up at my house again, this time with a different tactic. She didn't come with threats. Instead, she forced a smile and tried to sound reasonable. "Mr. Harrison, I think we can come to a compromise." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, now you want to compromise?" She nodded, clearly swallowing her pride. "If you remove the property, we'll rescind the fines, and we can discuss reasonable alternatives." I leaned against my porch railing, pretending to think it over. "That's an interesting offer, Karen, but you know what? I think I'll pass." Her fake smile twitched. "Mr. Harrison, let's be rational." I grinned. "Oh, I am. and I'm having way too much fun watching you struggle." She dropped the act, glaring at me. "You're going to regret this." I just shrugged. "We'll see." She stormed off once again, and as she disappeared on the street, I knew one thing for sure. She was running out of moves. The neighborhood was rallying against her. The HOA was scrambling to keep up, and best of all, I was still standing strong. I had pushed them to the edge, and now they were the ones losing control. Karen and the HOA were desperate now. The fines weren't working, the smear campaign had backfired, and their so-called community rules were being ignored left and right. Homeowners had realized that the HOA only had as much power as people let them have, and now, with my driveway rebellion leading the charge, they were losing that grip faster than they could scramble to hold on. But I knew they weren't done yet. Karen was too stubborn, too obsessed with control to just walk away without one last attempt to crush me. And sure enough, she made her final desperate move. A letter arrived in my mailbox, thicker than the previous notices. This one was official, typed out in full legal jargon, with every attempt to intimidate me. The HOA was suing me. They were claiming that my unauthorized landscaping was in violation of community standards and that my refusal to remove the sandpit had resulted in damages to the integrity of the neighborhood. They demanded immediate removal of the sand and an additional $10,000 in damages for harm caused to community property values. I read through it twice, shaking my head at the sheer stupidity of it all. They really thought this was going to scare me. They thought they could bully me into submission by waving some legal papers in my face. But I had been prepared for this. I called up my neighbor Tom, the one who had been giving me advice since the beginning. As soon as he picked up, I told him what was happening. He let out a low chuckle. "They really went and did it, huh? Suing you for their own screw-up." "Looks like it," I said. "You think they have a case?" "Not a chance," he replied. "But they are banking on you not knowing that. They assume you'll panic and give in. They assume wrong," I said, already feeling the fight building inside me. "So what's my next move?" Tom told me exactly what to do, and I followed every step. First, I contacted a lawyer, one who specialized in cases against homeowners associations. As soon as I told him the details, he practically laughed. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on," he assured me. "They can't claim damages for property they don't own, and their own rule book doesn't prohibit what you did. If they want to take this to court, I say let them. You'll win, and when you do, you can countersue for harassment." That was exactly what I needed to hear. The next week, the lawsuit officially moved forward, and the HOA likely expected me to panic and settle. Instead, I filed my own counter lawsuit. I wasn't just going to beat them, I was going to humiliate them. My claim was simple. The HOA had illegally attempted to seize my private property, fine me without proper justification, and engaged in targeted harassment. My lawyer made sure to include every shady tactic they had used. From the sudden rule change to the bogus fines to the smear campaign. Just like that, the battle had escalated into something far bigger than Karen had anticipated. By the time the court date arrived, word had spread all over the neighborhood. People were talking, whispering, speculating. It wasn't just about my driveway anymore. This had become a fight about whether the HOA had the right to bully homeowners into submission. The courtroom was packed when the trial started. On one side, Karen sat with the HOA's lawyer, both of them looking smug and self-assured. On the other, I sat next to my own attorney, calm and confident. As the proceedings began, the HOA's lawyer launched into a long-winded speech about community order and protecting neighborhood standards. He painted me as a reckless homeowner who had disrupted the peace, a troublemaker who had defied authority just for the sake of causing chaos. When it was our turn, my lawyers systematically tore their argument to shreds. First, he pointed out that the HOA's own rulebook did not prohibit my modifications. Then he presented my property deed, which clearly showed that my driveway was private property, meaning the HOA had no legal right to designate it as public parking. When the judge asked Karen to explain why the decision had been made without notifying affected homeowners, she fumbled for an answer. The final nail in the coffin came when my lawyer presented the fines the HOA had issued me. He asked Karen to point out exactly where in the bylaws it stated that they had the authority to fine a homeowner for modifying their own driveway. Karen stammered, shuffled through her papers, and finally admitted that there was no such rule. The judge's face was unreadable, but I could tell the case was already over. The HOA had overstepped, and they had been caught. When the ruling came down, it was a complete victory. The judge dismissed the lawsuit entirely, stating that the HOA had acted outside their legal authority. Not only that, but the judge ruled in favor of my counter-lawsuit. The HOA was ordered to drop all fines, issue a public retraction of their false accusations against me, and pay damages for harassment. The moment the gavel hit, the courtroom erupted into hushed murmurs. Karen looked like she was about to explode. After the ruling, the neighborhood practically celebrated. People were openly mocking the HOA, calling it their biggest failure yet. Some even started joking about turning their own driveways into sanctuaries just for fun. Karen tried to do damage control, but it was too late. She had lost control of the neighborhood. People saw the HOA for what it was, a group of petty, power-hungry bullies who crumbled the moment someone stood up to them. It didn't take long for the board to turn on her. Within weeks, a petition circulated to remove Karen as HOA president. It gathered signatures faster than anything the neighborhood had ever seen. She fought it, of course, but the writing was on the wall. The final vote came in. She was officially ousted. She packed up and moved out of the neighborhood soon after, unable to handle the humiliation. With Karen gone, the HOA had lost its enforcer. The board, now scrambling to avoid further backlash, repealed the ridiculous parking rule, effectively restoring my driveway to what it had always been, my private property. As for the sandpit, I let it stay for a little while longer, just as a reminder of what had happened. But eventually, I had it cleared and replaced with something better, a brand new, fully enclosed garage. No more parking issues, no more HOA nonsense. My property was mine again. One day, not long after everything had settled, a new family moved into the neighborhood. They stopped by to introduce themselves, and after some small talk, the husband glanced at my driveway. "So, I hear there's some drama about parking around here," he asked, grinning. I chuckled. "Oh yeah, but don't worry, that's all over now." His wife smiled. "Good to know. Wouldn't want to end up in a war with the HOA." I smiled back. "Trust me, that won't be a problem anymore." And with that, the battle was over. The HOA had tried to take what wasn't theirs, and in the end, they had lost everything. I had stood my ground, fought back, and won. My driveway was mine again, and better yet, the entire neighborhood had woken up to the truth. The HOA's days of unchecked power were over, and all it took was a truckload of sand.